I'd like to start this morning by paying tribute to the magnificent efforts of the Liverpool supporters who saved lives through their actions in Paris. They also fought for the truth regarding the events of Paris and refused to be beaten by the lies and smears of UEFA and the French government straight from the Hillsborough playbook. We need to remember this could have happened to any set of fans in Europe. Due to the late arrival of fans, the match has been delayed. A message on a screen in Stade de France that made so many of us feel physically ill. When we saw this, lives were once again being relayed to a watching world after so many of us have just experienced our worst day in football since Hillsborough, all because of the disgraceful organisation by UEFA and the French authorities. We knew immediately that another cover-up was in motion. After all, we'd been here before. I was sent this by Nick Braley, a Hillsborough survivor. As a Hillsborough survivor, I naively expected the policing to be focused on safety, especially given Paris's history of terrorist attacks, including one at the Stade de France just a few years ago. Instead, I was met with complete disorganisation, aggressive and violent policing, which resulted in my being kettled and ultimately bounced along a line of riot shields of Parisian police officers. 32 years ago, I escaped a life-threatening crush at Hillsborough, and now I face a situation where one slip or trip and it could have been witnessing deaths again at a football match. These things happen, people make mistakes, and they need to learn from them. Only here, again, I had to observe the police and authorities invent a pack of lies as they try to pass the blame onto innocent people, rather than take responsibility for their own failings. 33 years ago, the police did all they could to fabricate a false narrative. Here we are with the French authorities doing exactly the same. Please don't let them do this. Make sure they take responsibility and ensure that lessons are learned for the safety of all future sporting fans. That's why this report matters so much to so many people. 8 months since it was commissioned by the General Secretary of UEFA, the report into what really happened at the UEFA Champions League final in Paris on the 28th of May has finally been published. And to my internal relief, and to the relief of thousands of Liverpool and Real Madrid supporters who experienced the horror that evening, it is a world away from the UEFA-led cover-up which we saw during the evening of the 28th of May. This report places the blame correctly and firmly at the doorstep of those responsible for the game, which could have led to countless lives being lost. The report is clear, the fans bear no culpability. The investigation panel concludes that the overarching organisational failures by UEFA and the French authorities were at the root of what went so terribly wrong that evening. Of course it will.
Can I commend him? Well, gentlemen, he's got a love for the beautiful game and he's a love for Liverpool, and we commend him for that. Even though I'm not a Liverpool supporter, Madam Chair, but I very much enjoy that. Does the honourable member not agree that the fact that there was no loss of life was only by the grace of God, and that this should not lead to UEFA being excused from making amends to those fans whose experience was traumatic and to whom the beauty of watching this beautiful game has been forever tainted by fear and anxiety? And will the honourable member further agree that a mea culpa, simple apology, will not be acceptable to any of the fans, to the honourable gentleman, or indeed to myself?
Ian.
I completely agree with my honourable gentleman's remarks. The report exonerates Liverpool supporters of any blame or responsibility. In fact, the report backs up the statements made by so many supporters, including myself, when I stated that if it wasn't for the efforts and understanding of the Liverpool supporters that night, people would have died because of the failings of UEFA and the French authorities. I would like to thank the chair of the panel, Dr. Tiago Rodriguez, and members of the panel, Mr. Ronan Irian, Mr. Amanda Jacks, Mr. Frank Pau, Mr. Daniel Roberio, Mr. Kenny Scott, Mr. Lewis Silver, Professor Clifford Stott, and Pete Weatherby for their diligence. Of course,
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and he's bearing powerful witness to those events and what's happened subsequently. Will he agree with me that, I'm sure he will, that UEFA and the French authorities now need to be held accountable for their failures to properly manage that event and for all of the risks that ensued from that, which he so powerfully described?
Thanks to my honourable friend, and I agree 100%, unsurprisingly. So I'd like to thank the panel for their diligence and tenacity in seeking the truth and laying the foundation for justice. The work was beyond reproach, and they collectively deserve the thanks of every single football supporter in Europe, because when implemented, their recommendations will make the European game safer for all. The importance of supporters leading the fight for the truth to be laid bare in this report is incalculable, but this was truly a collective effort. I would like to place on record my thanks to Liverpool Football Club and Professor Phil Scranton for pulling together witness statements to inform the panel and their ceaseless support. Also, thanks must go to the many journalists across the world who have done so much to aid the quest for truth. So many contributed, but I would like to personally thank David Conn, Dan Austin, Rob Draper in the UK, and Pierre-Etienne Minanzo from Le Grip. What a difference it made to have excellent journalists who sought to find the truth, unlike in 1989 when the gutter press printed lies and smears. The panel report pinpoints many organisational failures, but I reflect here on some of the most damning. The UEFA model for organising was defective in that there was an absence of overall control or oversight of safety and security, an astounding failure for which those responsible must be held accountable. The French policing operational strategy was based on the lies and smears of the Hillsby disaster. It is inexcusable for a major police force to base its operational strategy for policing a huge global event, including the use of tear gas and pepper spray on innocent supporters, and its lack of protection for supporters from the local gangs, on old smears and lies. And to date, there has been no apology or an acknowledgement of its errors. Without this, how can anyone have confidence in the ability of Paris to safely hold a global sporting event again? UEFA presented to the French Senate inquiry a completely misleading view of what it knew of safety problems at previous events at Stade de France. This was unacceptable. UEFA and the authorities also sought to deflect responsibility, as the report highlights. The public response to UEFA in the aftermath of the problems on the night and in its subsequent evidence to the Senate was striking in its orientation to protect itself. It was a serious error. Of course.
I thank my friend for giving way. UEFA's initial response to the report said that they were committed to learning from the events, as my friend has quite rightly said, and cooperate closely with supporters groups, among others. Some parts of the report spoke about the impact on disabled people of UEFA's failings at last year's final. One of the recommendations said that there should be fuller and more proactive engagement with disabled supporter organisations and respective clubs to determine needs and requirements. So would my honourable friend agree with me that UEFA must come through on this recommendation and that they should regularly report on their progress in this area?
Absolutely. Thanks to my honourable friend, and I will touch on that in a minute, because we've got the fantastic Ted Morris from the Liverpool Disabled Supporters Association in the room. So, it was a serious error for UEFA to assume it could avoid accountability for a foreseeable near disaster at this flagship event. That statement within the report is utterly damning. So now that we have the report, what happens next? So two of the foremost campaigners for the truth around Paris are Joe Blott, chair of the Spirit of Shankly Liverpool Supporters Board, and Ted Morris from Liverpool Disabled Supporters Association. And they're clear on what should happen next. And I'm proud to have Ted Morris sitting in the room with us today. Joe Blott said, UEFA and all authorities must now accept all 21 recommendations cited in the report and act upon them. They must apologise for the lies and smears they used to shift responsibility from themselves to innocent fans, and they must formally retract the untrue statements made about supporters. UEFA must ensure that this never happens again and do everything in their power to enable all supporters to attend football matches, secure in the knowledge that their safety is paramount and will not be compromised. Of course we will.
Thank you, Ms Harrison. I'd like to thank the honourable friend for giving way and for the contribution he's making. But can I just ask him if he agrees with me that what was most worrying about events was that they were entirely foreseeable, given what had happened at European football matches involving numbers of different sets of fans in recent years. And doesn't he therefore worry, as I do, that those lessons won't be learnt as speedily as we want them to be, precisely because the near misses and the evidence that something like this could have taken place wasn't paid attention to until it was too late.
Ian. Thank you to my humble friend for that, and that's painted clearly in the report, and I wholeheartedly agree with everything that you've just said. So Ted Morris says, we do not seek recrimination or blame, that is for others to address. We do, though, ask UEFA to take on board the panel recommendations and make the necessary adjustments to allow disabled supporters to follow their chosen team in Europe without having to overcome so much prejudice and navigate so many hurdles. So I want to finish, and I want to ask the FA, who abandoned Liverpool supporters in 1989, not to back the vested interests of UEFA. Instead, back the interests of supporters. As our representative at UEFA, the FA in 2023 must save the game and its supporters. We need the FA to provide leadership and show courage to ensure that our demands regarding Paris are met in the halls of UEFA. The FA must heed the findings of this report and act upon them for the sake of English football and its supporters. And Minister, I urge the government to keep the political pressure on President Macron and Alexander Seferin of UEFA to ensure a full apology is made and the recommendations of this report are met. The government has a duty to Liverpool supporters and indeed to football supporters in the UK to ensure that this never happens again. Nothing can erase the dreadful events of that night in Paris. Indeed, we know of at least 2 Hillsborough survivors who have taken their own lives since Paris, with thousands others traumatised. The impact of the actions of UEFA and the French authorities cannot be underestimated, but we must hope that finally lessons will have been learned and that no supporter will ever have to go through what we went through. That would be a fitting legacy for the many who suffered that night in Paris. Thank you.